I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in America I'm John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always are happily ever after.
Long ago and far away, there was once a country of rolling farmlands and pastures and of quiet villages where everyone worked on the land. George was one of the very poorest farmers. He worked hard on his poor land, but still to make ends meet, he had to work for his wealthy neighbour, who was a bully. George loved his land and his shabby farmhouse. His rich bully of a neighbour had a fine house and more land and animals than he knew what to do with. However much he and his wife had, they were not happy. They had never been happy, and it seemed unlikely they ever would be happy. One morning, a mysterious figure appeared out of the mist, as if from nowhere. Almost as if he knew exactly where he was going, the stranger went straight to the rich man's farm. The unhappy couple were having a row. The stranger went straight up to the door and knocked. I'm a weary traveller, a stranger in this land. Could you in charity give me a bite to eat before I travel on? The man politely asked the farmer's wife. Her husband overheard this. He nearly exploded with rage. What insolence! Trying to get some of his food and not paying for it? Be off with you, he roared at the unfortunate stranger. I can't be feeding beggars all day. They'd soon eat me out of house and home. That morning, George was busy about his farm as usual. Winter was not far off, and they needed a lot of wood for cooking and heat. George could never understand how a man who was as rich as his neighbour and who owned such a lot of good things was always grumpy and miserable. For the truth was that he and Anna, his wife, were very happy together, although they never had a penny to spare. Anna was an excellent housewife, and George always declared that he would rather sit at her table than eat with the king himself. Their happiness was a byword for miles around. They were sitting down to their midday meal when the same stranger who had been treated so roughly by the wealthy farmer knocked on their door. But now he received a quite different welcome. George invited him in, insisting he rest for a while. He took the stranger's travel-stained coat from him and sat him in the most comfortable chair while he recovered from his travels. The stranger could see from the poor furnishings that George and Anna lived very simply. Nonetheless, he was treated like a lord. Nothing was too good for him. Both treated him as if he were their long-lost brother. "You have a long way to travel," they said, "so tonight you must rest with us. Then you can set off feeling refreshed." Anna thought to herself that it was a great shame that such a distinguished-looking young man should have to make do with the poor meal she had prepared for herself and her husband, and whispered to George that they really should have a roast that evening in the stranger's honour. They insisted, despite the stranger's protestations, that their new friends stay the night with them. The good couple would not take no for an answer. George showed him over his small holding and recounted all the local farming news and gossip. The stranger, in turn, told him of far lands which he had visited and the customs of farmers in other countries. Never had a day passed so pleasantly. The stranger soon found out a great deal about this couple, and that even though they had so few possessions, they still managed to be happy and contented. George felt that he had known this man all his life and confided in him all his troubles. But he didn't dwell on his problems. He was too fascinated with the stranger's stories and wanted to hear everything the man could tell him. It just seemed like minutes before Anna called them in for the evening meal. When the stranger saw the fine joint, he realized they had roasted one of their few sheep just in his honor. He was touched by the open-handed generosity of his poor hosts. A bottle of wine, which George and Anna had been saving for a special occasion for many years, was produced to add the finishing touch. Because this strange young man was such an amusing and interesting companion, George and Anna thought nothing of sharing all they had with him. It seemed a small price to pay for such an entertaining guest. They did not begrudge him a single mouthful of lamb or a drop of wine. They felt they had made a friend for life, and for them, a friendship was worth more than anything else. At least that night, none of them had a problem or a care in the world. Anna's cooking was as delicious as ever. The wine was the best they had ever tasted. George and Anna had never in their whole lives spent a more enjoyable evening. They made the stranger promise that he would always visit them whenever he passed by. It was after midnight before they realized how late it was and that it was time for bed. George and Anna insisted that the stranger sleep in the only bed in the house. They would be quite comfortable on the floor, close to the stove, they assured him. Reluctantly, the stranger went to sleep in their bed in the other room. And the couple settled down happily. The next morning, the stranger insisted that he should leave and apologized that he had no money to pay for the kindness and hospitality he had received. But George brushed his apologies aside. He and Anna didn't expect to be paid for their friendship. "But tell me," the stranger insisted, "the lamb that we ate last night, how many ears did it have?" "Why, 2, of course," George replied in puzzlement. "Then," replied the stranger, "you may have 2 wishes, 1 for each ear. Oh, I wish all was to live in peace, Anna said. And George said that Anna and I are always happy together. Your wishes are both granted, the stranger told them, smiling, and promised to be back again the same time next year. He set off with a cheery wave while the couple watched until he was out of sight. In the months that followed, George and Anna found that they were beginning to prosper. The next spring, their old cow Bessie began to produce gallons of rich milk. Everything they sowed in the tired fields grew wonderfully well. Their hens laid dozens of eggs. Even the old sow produced great litters of piglets. For the first time in their lives, the couple found that they could pay all their bills and still have something left for themselves. Thanks to the strange fertility of their land and livestock, they were even able to buy things they'd been needing for years. George could replace his old broken-down fencing and buy extra feed for the animals. Everywhere he looked, it seemed as if some kind of magic spell had been cast on their small holding to make everything flourish. They went to the market to sell their produce. They found that they did so well, they even had money over to buy 1 or 2 luxuries for themselves. Once or twice a year, the travelling peddler would come to the nearby village. Anna wanted to choose some fine new cloth for a gown, and George a new pipe. As they were the poorest couple in the village, people were astonished to see that they had so much money to spend. Everybody knew how frugal they always were, and yet here they were, George with his fine new pipe, and Anna with fine fabric for a gown. What had happened? George and Anna's new prosperity became the talking point among all the villagers. Even the rich neighbour and his discontented wife noticed that George and Anna were actually spending money on themselves. Anna told her neighbours their strange story and how good fortune had come to them through their strange guest. Everyone agreed that they would look out for any weary travellers to entertain, and who knows what good luck might befall them. George and Anna were sure that their friend was responsible for their new riches. When the rich farmer's wife heard this story, she felt even more ill done by than before. She had no difficulty in realizing who the stranger was, and was appalled that good fortune had passed them by as a result of her husband's hasty words. Not that she mentioned this to anybody, as they would only gossip behind her back. On the way home, she lost no time in telling her husband what she had learned and bitterly scolded him for the way he had thrown away such an opportunity. "We should be the richest people in the land by now if we had given that fellow some food," she cried. "What's a meal, after all? What's a slice of meat or a pint of ale in exchange for wealth and position?" The farmer knew he was totally in the wrong, but that didn't improve his temper one bit. "Well, I'll know what to do next time," he grumbled. He made a special journey to tell George that the next time the stranger visited him, he was to send him round to them immediately. My wife and I expect to see him, so make sure you do it." And George, not realizing what was behind the neighbour's unexpected hospitality, readily agreed to do so. Sure enough, exactly 1 year later, the stranger appeared at George and Anna's cottage. George was delighted to see his friend again and heartily welcomed him. Anna, too, was overjoyed to see him. They had so much to tell him. What had happened these past 12 months and their astonishing good fortune, which they were sure was thanks in some mysterious way to him. "You have been a good friend indeed," George told him. "But I've been instructed by our neighbour to invite you to dinner there tonight. But please, come and visit us tomorrow." So the stranger, agreeing to visit his friends before he departed the next day, set off for the landowner's house. The rich man couldn't wait for the stranger to arrive at his door. When he saw the man walk across the fields, he rushed out to greet him, welcoming him like a long-lost son. He couldn't do too much for the traveller. Even his sour-faced wife put on her best smiles for him and greeted him as if he were a visiting prince. They both fussed around, insisting he take the best place at the table. Could they take his hat from him? Oh, surely he would like his cloak brushed. "My friend, we are delighted to see you," the landowner enthused. It was all very different from his reception last year. The stranger could not help noting the contrast, but he held his peace. The meal that was served that night would not have disgraced a king's table. The wife had spent months planning what she would do if the stranger ever came back, and everything was of the very best. The silver and pewter gleamed in the candlelight. Only the finest crystal was used, only the finest napkins. And the stranger had to admit that the landowner's wife was an excellent cook. Where he had eaten lamb with George and Anna, here there was fine sirloin of beef, roasted to a turn. Each word of praise he uttered was honey to the couple's ears. He had only to congratulate the wife on her cooking, and they looked as if they had been awarded a medal. No guest ever had such attentive hosts. It seemed as if their only concern was that he should have the finest meal in the finest surroundings, that everything had been arranged simply to please him. The stranger greatly enjoyed this hospitality. He was shown to the very best bedchamber, the landowner's own. His host repeatedly asked if the stranger required anything further, but the man simply replied that all he wished to do was sleep. So with a bow and a scrape, the landowner left him. The following morning, the stranger thanked his host profusely for their hospitality and explained that he had arranged to visit his dear friends Anna and George that morning. "Oh, then allow me, please, to drive you there," the landowner insisted. "Our guests should have only the very best." The wife escorted him herself to where the smart trap and shining horse stood waiting. "You have both been very kind to me. Alas, I cannot repay you for your hospitality," the stranger said. This was the moment the couple had been waiting for so anxiously. It seemed to them an age before the stranger asked, "How many horns did the ox which we ate last night have?" The landowner, prompted by his anxious wife, replied, after hesitation, "Why, I believe 4." 4, replied the stranger, not at all surprised. Then you may have 4 wishes, 2 for each of you. The landowner and his wife exchanged greedy glances. They could hardly contain their glee, and the landowner set off with his guest with a high heart, and the horse high-stepping all the way. 4 wishes. Why, they could become the richest couple in the kingdom. On the road back, the landowner happily daydreamed about what he would wish for. A fine townhouse, a chest full of gold, a title from the king. Really, 4 wishes were hardly enough for all the things he wanted. He was so lost in his greedy thoughts that he didn't notice that the harness had come loose until his horse came to a dead halt. "Oh, you stupid creature," the landowner cried at him in rage. "I wish you'd go to the devil." He was hopping mad. He had wasted one of his precious wishes. Well, at least there were 3 left. In the meantime, his wife waited for his return with rising impatience. What on earth was keeping the man? "You silly fool, I wish you'd stop dawdling and come back." And hey presto, there he was in front of her, frothing with rage. Aghast, they realized only too clearly what had happened, and reluctantly each admitted using up 1 wish. Characteristically, they started blaming each other for wasting the wishes in such a way. 2 wonderful wishes gone, and nothing to show for it. Oh, his wife could scream. "Just think of all the good things we could have wished for by now." He hurried after her, shouting, "Oh, stupid am I? Everyone knows that an ox has only 2 horns, and I wish the other 2 grew out of your head." The minute the words left his mouth, the landowner realized what he'd done. There they were, 2 horns sticking straight out of her forehead. And the last wish was hers. Understanding that his future wealth was at stake, he tried to cheer her up. "Think of all the gowns and pretty jewels you could have, my dear. All the gold that you could wish for. Who cares about 2 little horns when you can have your heart's desire?" "My heart's desire right now is to look as I always have, not like some freak," she snapped. Before he could stop her, she had wished the horns away. "We still have each other, our house and our land, and in future we'll have to be content with that, won't we?" At least the strange guest had taught her a lesson. As for her husband, that, I'm afraid, was a different matter.